Human rights is, geez, that's a good question.
Human rights. Oh, that's a tough one.
Wow.
I don't even know how to give that a definition.
I would probably have to do a little bit of homework or something.
Any right that I think just as a normal, human,
The rights that humans have?
Oh, that's a very large debate.
Tú le puedes preguntar a 20 personas y te van a dar 20 diferentes opiniones.
Non saprei, è una domanda complicatissima.
We just take them for granted that they're there, but we don't even consider what they are.
Human rights are the rights you have simply because you're human. It's how you instinctively expect and deserve to be treated as a person, like the right to live freely, to speak your mind, and to be treated as an equal. There are many kinds of rights. Most apply to a certain group. But human rights are the only ones that apply to absolutely everyone, everywhere. That means kids, old people, poor people, basketball players, garbage men, rappers, teachers, Africans, Indians, Albanians, Christians, Muslims, Kabbalists, atheists, your mom, your dad, your next-door neighbor, and you all have the exact same human rights. In other words, they're universal. But the question remains, what are they?
Name the human rights?
What the human rights are?
The right to live.
Equality between all peoples.
Right to religion, the right to...
Is there supposed to be a list somewhere I should be aware of?
According to the United Nations, there are a total of 30 human rights, which are usually lumped together and called simply human rights. They're all listed out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the world's most widely accepted document on the subject. But it was a long time in coming. At first, there were no human rights. If you were in with the right crowd, you were safe. If you weren't, well, you weren't. But then a guy named Cyrus the Great decided to change all that. After conquering Babylon, he did something completely revolutionary. He announced that all slaves were free to go. He also said people had the freedom to choose their religion, no matter what crowd they were a part of. They documented his words on a clay tablet known as the Cyrus Cylinder. And just like that, human rights were born. The idea spread quickly to Greece, to India, and eventually to Rome. They noticed that people naturally followed certain laws, even if they weren't told to. They called this natural law, but it kept getting trampled on by those in power. Not until 1,000 years later in England did they finally get a king to agree that no one can overrule the rights of the people, not even a king. People's rights were finally recognized, and they were now safe from those in power. Kind of. It still took a bunch of British rebels declaring their independence before the king got the point that all men are created equal. Which isn't to say he liked the idea, but he couldn't stop them, and America was born. The French immediately followed with their own revolution for their own rights. Their list was even longer, and they insisted that these rights weren't just made up. They were natural. The Roman concept of natural law had become natural rights. Unfortunately, not everyone was so thrilled. In France, a general named Napoleon decided to overthrow the new French democracy and crown himself emperor of the world. He almost succeeded, but the countries of Europe joined forces and defeated him. Human rights was again a hot topic. They drew up international agreements, broadly granting many rights across Europe. But only across Europe. The rest of the world somehow still didn't qualify. Instead, they got invaded, conquered, and consumed by Europe's massive empires. But then a young lawyer from India decided enough was enough. His name was Mahatma Gandhi, and in the face of violence, he insisted that all people of Earth had rights, not just in Europe. Eventually, even Europeans started to agree. But it wasn't going to be that easy. 2 world wars erupted. Hitler exterminated half the Jewish population of Earth in horrifying Nazi death camps. And all told, 90 million people died. Never had human rights been so terrifyingly close to extinction. and never had the world been more desperate for change. So the countries of Earth banded together and formed the United Nations. Their basic purpose was to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. But what were human rights? Were they the proclamations of Cyrus, the natural laws of Rome, the declarations of France? Everyone seemed to have a slightly different idea of what human rights should be. But under the supervision of Eleanor Roosevelt, they finally agreed on a set of rights that applied to absolutely everyone. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The French concept of natural rights had finally become human rights. So, in summary, at first, only a few lucky people had any rights, until one of those guys decided, hey, other people should have some rights too, which was great, except not everyone agreed. And it only took a few thousand years of fighting and declarations and more fighting until everyone finally agreed that human rights should apply to everyone. And they all lived happily ever after. Except for one little problem. If people have the right to food and shelter, why are 16,000 children dying of starvation every day? 1 every 5 seconds. If people have freedom of speech, why are thousands in prison for speaking their minds? If people have the right to education, why are over 1 billion adults unable to read? If slavery has truly been abolished, why are 27 million people still enslaved today? More than twice as many as in 1800. The fact is, when it was signed, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights did not have the force of law. It was optional. And despite many more documents, conventions, treaties, and laws, it's still little more than words on a page. So the question is, who will make those words a reality?
I have a dream today.
When Dr. King marched for racial equality, he was marching for rights that had been guaranteed by the United Nations for almost 2 decades. But still, he marched. When Nelson Mandela stood up for social justice in the 1990s, his country had already agreed to abolish such discrimination for almost 40 years. But still, he fought. Those who fight today against torture, poverty, and discrimination are not giants or superheroes. They're people. Kids, mothers, fathers, teachers. Free-thinking individuals who refuse to be silent. Who realize that human rights are not a history lesson. They're not words on a page. They're not speeches or commercials or PR campaigns. They are the choices we make every day as human beings. They are the responsibility we all share to respect each other, to help each other, and to protect those in need. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home. So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere.
Hello, and welcome to Youth for Human Rights radio show. I'm here with Damian Kevitt, who is the founder of SAFE, or Streets Are For Everyone, which is a traffic safety nonprofit. And I am Beatrice Schuster. I'm the vice president of Youth for Human Rights California chapter. But welcome, Damian.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. So we're going to talk today about the topic of traffic safety, which might not initially seem like a human rights issue, but it very much is. So we're going to talk about Damian's story and the relationship of traffic safety and human rights.
Thank you. Yeah, it's you know, the subject of traffic safety is not something that people typically discuss. they think of congestion, they think of how fast they get to work. But what happened to me and the subject of safer streets is something that is starting to gain more and more traction because it is such a huge factor in people's ability to live, to work, to play, to just have a safe life.
Right. Yeah. And as I've become more aware of the issue, I've just seen it across all my friends. You don't realize, but you talk to someone, they're like, oh yeah, I was hit by a car. I was hit while I was on my bike. I had a traffic, collision or whatever experience that was traumatic. So it's much more common than we might realize.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, speaking of that, do you want to explain what inspired you to
my background
create?
and how I got to the subject of traffic safety?
Yes.
Well, let's see. My background is actually as a counselor at my church, and also I studied marine biology, and I've been a cyclist for years, but just a casual commuter and things like that, except in February 2013, I was taking a short bicycle ride with my wife going to the zoo for a picnic, the LA Zoo, and about 500 to 600 feet away from the LA Zoo, I was hit by an individual in a light-colored minivan, and it was a very minor collision. So if he had simply stopped, I probably would have walked away with a few cuts and bruises, probably not even a broken bone.
Right.
Except he decided not to stop and he decided to flee the scene of the collision. And the result of that was I started on the hood of his car, and I fell forward, and I was essentially run over and pinned underneath the car as he took off. And he took off from the streets of Griffith Park, which for those who live in Los Angeles, Griffith Park is kind of like Central Park for Los Angeles. It's a huge park. It's got the zoo. It's got, it's several square miles.
Yeah, and it's very hilly, and it's not really busy street kind of area. Maybe the perimeter is, but inside it's like you're driving around a park.
You're driving around a park, and it's actually a wonderful place despite what happened to me, it's a wonderful place for cycling and for running and hiking, and it's just a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Well, the individual that hit me took off with me pinned underneath the car and took off onto the on-ramp to the 5 freeway.
Which is not that close to Griffith Park, so it had to be like you were trapped in there for a while.
Yeah, well, he was actually
right
fairly close to the on-ramp.
Okay.
Yeah, so the actual location where I was hit was fairly close to that on-ramp. It's one of the few on-ramps that are right next to Griffith Park. I think there's 2 of them or 3 of them. The park's very big, so it actually is on several sides, has a freeway near it. And took off down the on-ramp with me pinned underneath the car, dragging me nearly a quarter of a mile. Well over 600 feet with me underneath the car, down the on-ramp, down the 5 freeway. I was luckily conscious. I know some people, when I tell them the story, and I've told the story a number of times.
Yeah.
And I bring up the fact that I was conscious, and people shudder. It's just like, I wish I wasn't conscious. I mean, that would not be what I would want. But because I was conscious, I was able to actually figure out why I was trapped underneath the car, what was holding me underneath the car, and figure out how to get free. But in doing all of that, I mean, anyone, doesn't matter how athletic or unathletic or whatever, it's brutal.
Yeah.
And my right leg was basically ripped off, and about 20 pounds of flesh was ripped off my body in less than 2 minutes.
Yeah. It's incredible that you survived that.
Yeah. And I doesn't matter what religion you believe in, whether it's God or karma or Allah, or it doesn't matter what viewpoint you have, that was a miracle. I should not have survived that. And I did, and I was left in traffic lanes in the 5 freeway. My wife was the first person to find me. She actually saw me on the freeway and rode her bicycle down the on-ramp to me. And she thought I was laying there, and she thought I was dead. There was no way. The way the body looked, and the foot was hanging off, and there was blood all over the place. And I opened my eyes and was very much alive. And not only was I alive, I was aware of what had just happened. And I won't tell you actually what I said there because I can't repeat that. But let's just say there's some expletives. There was some.
Right. That's an appropriate
It was an
moment for
appropriate
expletives.
reaction.
Yeah.
If there's any time there where expletives are appropriate, that was that time.
Yeah.
Luckily, an ambulance was there within a few minutes, and that's its own miracle, how fast the ambulance got there, and there's a whole story behind that. But I was rushed to the hospital with 20 broken bones and, pretty severe injuries, and I managed to survive. And 4 months later, I walked out of the hospital.
Wow.
I didn't have a right leg. My right leg has been ripped off, and I have a prosthetic leg now. But I walked out, and a week later, I got back on a bicycle.
Wow.
And started relearning how to ride. I had to learn how to walk again, but then I started to relearn how to ride a bicycle again.
Yeah.
And I started my campaign on safer streets, which really started in the hospital. The more I learned, I had no idea how dangerous the roads are in Los Angeles, but not only in Los Angeles, across
Everywhere.
the U.S. and across the world.
Yeah.
And the figures are just staggering.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
are.
the number of people that are injured or killed or maimed in traffic collisions is unbelievable. In LA, just to give you a comparison, and people don't think of LA as generally a dangerous place. It may not, may be dirty. We have homelessness. We have this. More people are dying from traffic collisions than from gunshots.
Wow.
That's how.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's how significant it is. Across the U.S., the figures. I'm going to let you guess this. How many thousands of people die from traffic collisions every year?
In a year?
In a year in the U.S.
30,000?
Higher.
Wow.
It's about 42,000 people die from traffic collisions every year.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I probably, honestly, would have given you a lower number, but I have done research for Damien's organization and written grants, so I'm actually a more informed person. I was still wrong.
Yeah.
I still underestimated it.
So it's a pretty major situation in terms of LA, in terms of the United States, and in terms of the world. And I think my figures I'm actually going to pull this up. I think I have this on my my information here, but it's about 1.25 million people every year are killed in traffic collisions around the world.
Worldwide. Yeah.
That is more than all of the wars combined.
Wow.
Every year.
Yeah.
So it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And that affects, of course, right to life. I mean, let's just bring this back to human rights, because this is all about human rights.
Because that's what we're about here. Yeah.
that is right to life right there.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that's also the freedom of movement.
Right, because it's, you have to be able to cross the street. You have to be able to ride your bike where you want. You have to be able to, people are killed in car collisions too. It's not just, cars versus pedestrians or bicycles. It's, even you should be safe within your own car.
Yeah, absolutely. It also affects the right to play. A lot of, what I was doing was I was out on a bicycle ride on a Sunday morning,
Right.
enjoying myself. And I didn't think that I would lose my leg and nearly my life by
Right.
going out on a nice couple-hour bicycle ride with my wife.
Yeah, and especially two of the groups that are most vulnerable in traffic collisions are elderly people, which gets into elder abuse and things we've discussed also somewhat on this radio show, but also children, who are especially have a right to play and learn and all of that.
Yeah, and I'm more familiar with the statistics in Southern California. The number of individuals that are killed, it's disproportionately, in other words, it's more children and the elderly, which makes sense because kids are not necessarily as aware of cars, they are also not as fast and not as visible.
Right.
The elderly are definitely not as fast. And so as they're crossing the street and, they're trying to make it to the other side, if someone comes around the corner or something like that, it's a higher number of individuals in those age ranges.
Yeah, and if they do get hit, they're more likely to break a bone or have some sort of organ damage or things like that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's pedestrians and cyclists, considering how much, where people are, using cars, are they using buses, are they walking? And the large percentage in Los Angeles is cars. I mean, we're talking about 70%, of the people are using cars in Los Angeles. Yet you have nearly half of the people who are severely injured or killed are pedestrians or cyclists.
Right.
So, and that's just because you don't have
armor.
airbags and armor and seat belts and things like that,
to protect
Pedestrians
you.
don't even wear
Yeah.
bubble wrap these days, you know.
Yeah.
That was a joke, but
Yeah, we're not advocating for bubble wrap as
No,
a traffic safety
no.
policy. But yeah, the other thing is that also that made me think of other people who have other human rights violations going on are also more vulnerable. So in my research, I found that, poorer neighborhoods where there might be discrimination or discriminatory practices or, inadequate access to food, shelter, healthcare, things like that, they are much more disproportionately affected by traffic collisions because they don't have proper roads and, safety and things like that. And in more affluent communities that are more active and, whatever, they can work with their local governments to make sure that their roads are safe or whatever. But the disadvantaged communities are definitely, still disadvantaged when it comes to traffic safety and more likely to lose their life or, a limb or anything else.
Yeah, it's what's been being found a lot more is it's not just educating the individuals. That is a huge factor, education and enforcement. Enforcement being enforcing the laws and,
Right.
distracted driving and drunk driving and speeding and things like that, but it's also the engineering of the roads themselves.
Right.
And there's a lot that can be done to make the roads safer and idiot-proof because some people are not necessarily aware. And a great example is there's an engineering thing where you can do in a crosswalk, and it's called a scramble walk. And what that is normally you see a crosswalk and you see lines across, and people cross at the corners, either to the right or to the left. Okay, that's a normal crosswalk.
Right.
Right. Well, a scramble walk is where you can actually cross at each corner, or you can go diagonally.
Yeah, there's one in Glendale at
There's
the
one in
Americana
Glendale.
Mall here.
Yes, and there's only certain intersections that qualify for it, and those intersections are really where you have a tremendous amount of pedestrian traffic.
Yeah.
Because most of the times when pedestrians are hit, they're hit when a car is making a right-hand turn. That's actually a majority of the time. They're making a quick right. Let's say their light just turned green and they want to take a right and a pedestrian's just stepping off.
Right.
Okay, so what has been done is there's an intersection, actually, the best example is an intersection of Hollywood and Highland, which is a very big tourist area. So you've got a lot of tourists, a lot of people who are not necessarily aware of our traffic laws in Los
Right.
Angeles, whether they're from another city in the US or from another part of the world. They're not as familiar with this neighborhood, and it's also a tremendous amount of car traffic.
Right.
This was one of the most dangerous intersections in the entire city of Los Angeles. The number of pedestrians who were hit and killed in this intersection, it would happen once a month, if not more than once a month, you'd get a pedestrian hit or killed.
Yikes.
And hit, I mean, not just like bumped, I'm talking about into the
Hit.
hospital. Yeah,
Yeah.
like severely injured. So this particular cross intersection was re-engineered to put in a scramble walk. And what that means is that not only are you changing the dynamics of how the pedestrians are crossing, but you're also, when they're crossing, no cars are allowed to
Yeah.
move.
Just shuts it down.
And so when the cars are moving, there's no pedestrians allowed to cross. So you've now removed pedestrians from cars by changing, re-engineering that intersection.
Right.
The result is, in the year and a half since this scramble walk was put in place, there has been 0 serious injuries or fatalities. Actually, I'm not sure on the serious injury parts. I stand possibly might be correct on that, but I know there's definitely been no fatalities.
Yeah.
Since that scramble walk has been put in there. That's changing the engineering. So yes,
Yeah.
it'd be great if we could, tell all the pedestrians to watch for crazy drivers, or all drivers to watch for crazy pedestrians. But here you actually change the intersection, and now
Yeah.
you have a safe intersection. That's not every intersection needs that change. But
Yeah.
where it does qualify, it is one of the most effective ways to prevent serious injuries and fatalities.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, just changing the engineering of the city can have a huge impact also because it impacts, pedestrian behavior. If you have a very clear, huge way that you can diagonally walk across right up the street, are you going to jaywalk? Probably not.
Right.
Because you know that it's safe and you can just go easily that way. Yeah, this is just my personal PSA moment to please don't jaywalk because I am, I drive, but I'm also very aware of pedestrians, and I try to be very, I work with traffic safety, so I try to be really on it, and I just get so personally mad at pedestrians when I see them jaywalking like 20 feet from a crosswalk, and I'm like, you can be hit in a crosswalk. Your risks of getting hit are so high, even in a crosswalk, and now you're gonna just run across this. Like, I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I just want to like yell at them when I see that. So please don't jaywalk. It's not like a small thing.
Yeah, it
It's a big
is
deal.
actually one of the more significant ways in which pedestrians can be hit is if they're crossing in the middle of the street as opposed to at an intersection where cars are more likely to watch for them.
They should always watch for them, but if they're not 100% at the crosswalk, then they're like at 50% when you're jaywalking. So, yeah. And the other thing that we have discussed is also there's change in the engineering and sort of the city planning, but there's also just the cultural education and the way that we think about traffic safety and even changing the language that we use.
Yeah, there's been actually a huge shift, and what I described in terms of re-engineering streets and the education and the enforcement and just sort of, it's like taking traffic safety in a holistic fashion. You know, this is all the rage, being holistic. You know,
I like it.
Treating mind and body and spirit, and well, this is like mind, body, spirit for of a city in terms of traffic safety, and the program is known around the world as Vision Zero.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that people can't see anymore. It's not an optometry term. It's actually something that was started in Sweden. And it was a fundamental shift in terms of how they viewed the subject of transportation and traffic safety. And what it is it shifted in previous years or before the Vision Zero program, the idea that people are going to be hit and killed because they're using streets, and that's, you know, it's part of that whole situation of streets and roads and cars and pedestrians. It was assumed that there was always going to be people hit and killed. It was just considered acceptable. That's what happens. As long as it's not too many, it's okay. Okay, that's an interesting concept. You know, if I were to ask you, is it okay that one of your family members is hit or killed,
No.
you know, crossing a road
No.
or, you know, there's no,
Yeah.
you can't say that it's okay that a percentage,
Yeah.
there's a possibility that your family might be hit or
Well,
killed.
especially when it is a preventable issue. If it's not preventable, if it's like there's a huge outbreak of blah, blah disease and unfortunately part of the population is going to die, it's like, oh, that's terrible. But this is not like that. This is very easily preventable.
This is preventable. And
Yeah.
that is a shift in the viewpoint. And that is the fundamental shift with Vision Zero. The idea that traffic collisions are preventable.
They're not a natural disaster.
They're not a natural
human
disaster. It's not, you know, it's not like a tornado that sometimes, you know, you only have a few minutes notice these days, although it's getting better.
Yeah.
But it's not like an earthquake where, you know, it just will happen and,
Yeah.
oh, no. Traffic collisions are not natural disasters. They
Yes.
are preventable.
Yes.
That was the first shift for
Yeah.
Vision Zero. And it is also the other shift for Vision Zero was that you actually had to make human life the priority. I know, that sounds like something that is just too obvious for you and me.
But when you come to city planning or like government ordinances or traffic, right? Like in LA, we're always concerned with how long it's going to take to get from point A to point B. There are other things that we, prioritize.
We prioritize how fast can we get to Starbucks and get our latte. You know, I mean, that is a priority for a lot of people. Well, it is now considered unacceptable that someone in using a road would be hit and killed. In other words, anytime someone is hit and killed, that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
Whereas before Vision Zero, it was actually considered, well, it's just going to happen a percentage of the time.
Inevitable.
And it's inevitable, and that's what happens.
Yeah.
That was the fundamental shift of Vision Zero in Sweden, is where it started. And the stats are actually quite amazing because the number of vehicle miles traveled, so the number of traveling, how many miles vehicles are traveling per year has continued to skyrocket in Sweden as population growth and things like that. Okay, great. But the number of people who've been killed or severely injured in Sweden has dropped drastically since the start of Vision Zero because they treat every traffic collision as something that was preventable, and what do you need to do to change that?
Right.
Okay. Now, the best analogy, so this is again, for some people you're like, what do you mean? Of course that would make sense, but it actually was a huge shift, and it mirrors what they do with commercial airlines. So in the U.S., it's called the FAA. They have various different agencies around the world, but the idea is that in commercial airlines, it's unacceptable for anyone to die while traveling on an airplane. And any time a plane crashes, it's thoroughly investigated, and there's all sorts of, bulletins that come out and retraining of pilots and re-engineering of every single time a plane crashes. It's reviewed as if it should never have happened and what went wrong.
Yeah. And many more people die in car collisions than in plane crashes. So,
Well, yeah, in airline industry, the number of people that are traveling on airlines is just unbelievably skyrocketing. Yet in 2017, yeah, skyrocket, yes. In 2017, there were 0 fatalities for an entire year
wow.
for the commercial airline industry.
That's great.
2018, they had some fatalities.
Okay. Well.
But still, considering the number of people that travel by
Yeah.
airline, no one died for an entire year.
Yeah.
That's the same goal with Vision Zero.
Right.
The goal is you're using the roads, no one needs to die.
Yeah.
And
Seems pretty basic.
Yes.
And it also, just because I've also worked with Damien on some Vision Zero stuff, to be clear, we're not talking about no collisions, no injuries, no one being sent to the hospital, no situation, like Damien's situation would technically be okay under Vision Zero. We're just going for no fatalities.
Actually, Vision Zero, at least in Los Angeles, encompasses the idea of serious injuries.
Okay, it does, okay.
So, for instance, my situation would be considered a failure on
Yeah.
Vision Zero.
Well, of course it is, yeah.
But it doesn't assume that this is going to happen overnight.
Right, exactly.
It's reviewing things. How do you change the dynamics? How do you re-engineer straits? How do you do better enforcement? How do you
Right.
do better education?
Yeah.
How do you do all of these things better until you bring down the number of serious injuries, fatalities,
Yeah.
ultimately to the goal of 0? That might seem like pie in the sky, but if you don't set that goal, you'll
Right.
never get
Well,
there.
and that's why we have to start with fatalities, because that's obviously, the worst of it.
Yeah.
And okay, let's just try to get 0 fatalities and then we can work on the rest of it. So that just shows where we're at right now, that we're just trying to not have anybody die.
Yeah.
Like that is an
Which,
indication.
That's, again, let's pull this back to human rights. Just the idea that there is a right to life, and just because someone is existing and using a street, that they don't have a right to life,
Yeah.
that's insane.
Yeah.
So the idea of this Vision Zero and re-engineering things is really putting in basic human rights
Right.
In ways that people don't even realize.
Yeah.
So the other thing that, there's a lot of dynamics that happen as a result of all of this, and there's a lot of work. And while my organization, Streets Are For Everyone, which, by the way, everyone is welcome to check out at streetsareforeveryone.org, and we have a number of programs. We work with a lot of other organizations.
Right.
We're a small nonprofit that was started after what happened to me, and it was started, and we've done a lot. We've had bills approved through the governor of California. We've had
Right.
legislation through the city of Los Angeles. We're working with schools and LAPD and various different organizations across the city for education. We've re-engineered streets.
Yeah.
Not that we personally went out there and re-engineered, but
Yeah.
we've worked with the city
Yeah.
and government officials to actually make specific streets safer. So all of that is grassroots and advocacy,
Right.
which goes right into another human right, which is the right to responsibility. And that's what we work on. We work on that responsibility for safer streets, for the citizens of this area, for the citizens of California, for the whole U.S.
Yeah. Yeah, and the right to responsibility also applies to pedestrians, drivers, bicyclists, to be responsible for, maintaining their own human rights and those around them. If you're driving and you're like, there's somebody crossing and they shouldn't be, whatever, that's not very responsible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And I do want to point out, there was one thing that I don't know if anyone's noticed, but I've referred to every single time we talk about traffic collisions, I've mentioned collisions, and I haven't used the A word. And this is a bad word, but I'm going to say it right now. It's called an accident. I don't use that word.
right.
And luckily, she has been very good, and I've trained her.
I don't use the word accident either. Because it's not an accident, it's something that happened that was preventable. And it's not meant to demonize anyone who is involved or responsible for or at fault in a traffic collision. It's to say, this is not an accident that no one can do anything about. This is something that we can do something about.
Yeah,
which is why we don't use that word.
It's very interesting because the history of the word accident, it was not, originally, the word accident was actually a PR campaign from the 1920s and 1930s by the car industry.
Yeah.
And the reason is because at that time, there were pedestrians that were being hit and killed, and it was actually causing bad press in the media, and it was also causing, they felt it was causing a problem with people buying cars because
Yeah.
they felt cars were dangerous. Well,
Yeah.
they are actually dangerous.
Yeah. Has anybody read Great Gatsby? I mean, cars are obviously very dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. So, So there was a whole PR campaign by the car industry at that time in order to make people feel better about driving cars, that if they hit someone, it's an accident. In other words, you're not responsible, that just happened. You know, the pedestrian just happened to be crossing the street while you were zooming down the road.
Not quite.
You know, oops, it wasn't your fault. So
Right.
accident implies non-responsibility.
Yeah.
There's that violation of that human right, no responsibility.
Right.
So that's what accident implies, and that's very deliberate. That was actually put in back in the 1920s and the
Yeah.
1930s across the entire United States.
Yeah.
The truth is, it's not an accident by actual scientific study, and I have the numbers here. 95 to 98% of the time, by scientific study, it's not an accident, it's preventable.
Right.
So there's a lot of effort in the traffic safety arena to recalibrate how people talk about it. In Europe, they don't call it accident. They call it a crash or a collision.
Right.
In most places across Europe, if a plane crashes, you would never call it a plane accident.
Right. That sounds weird.
Right. You would
Yeah.
call it a plane crash. That was a plane crash. You know,
Yeah.
a plane fell out of the sky and crashed. It's a collision, it's a crash, it's not an accident. Well, in cars, when a car hits someone, maybe the pedestrian was, you know, crossing at was jaywalking. Maybe the driver was drunk. Maybe the driver was distracted. Maybe he was speeding. You know what I mean? Maybe he was driving tired and actually wasn't even awake practically.
Yeah. Making an illegal turn.
Making an illegal
and
turn.
all sorts of things.
There is, again, in 95 to 98% of the time, every collision is preventable.
Right.
So calling it an accident makes it seem like
Yeah.
it's not your fault.
Yeah.
Or
And-
not someone's fault.
And it might seem like a small deal to some people that, oh, who cares what word you use or whatever, we all know what we mean. But especially as someone who writes for a living, like the words really do matter and they change the way that we think about the situation.
Yeah.
And even just having the conversation right now, even if you accidentally, you know, after you listen to this radio show, we expect that you will never ever use the word accident again. But even if you do, you'll think about it and you'll go, oh, right, like I don't mean to imply there's no responsibility. So even just having this conversation about the words that we use just brings it to light and makes you more aware.
Yeah,
of
and
the situation.
we're really working actually right now with changing how it's talked about in the media and the press. So what you might notice this or not, as traffic reporters, for the most part, do not call it an accident.
Right.
They call it
Collision.
a crash or a collision.
Yeah.
And that is literally because the more they call it an accident, the more people feel like they're not
Whatever.
responsible. And it actually
Yeah.
causes more accidents if people feel like they have no responsibility.
More collisions.
That's right. So there we go. So
Yeah.
that's something that, you know, I just wanted to point that out there is, you know, we've been talking about all of this here, and not at any point in time have we mentioned the A word.
Yeah.
And because it's not an accident, it really is
Yeah.
a crash or a collision.
I mean, I guess maybe if you're in that 1% where it was just, but even still, there's probably things that, even if an individual in that situation, you know, physics-wise, scientifically wouldn't have been able to avoid that collision, well, then what should the city have done to create a better infrastructure that there are not unavoidable collisions happening
Right.
in our community? So
Right.
it's preventable at some level in 100% of cases, even if there's that tiny 1%.
So I implore all of our listeners and the people watching this, please, as best you can, I slip up sometimes. I sometimes use the A word. Sometimes I'm not
Accidentally.
perfect. Accidentally, we'll use the accident word. But, you know, try to switch what you call
Yeah.
it to a crash or collision. And if we all do that, it's a tiny little thing. But you know what? The more people that do that, the more people get the idea that they can be responsible for the lives of others.
Yeah, which is a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, okay, you're not going to go out and volunteer in your community, you don't have time, da, da, da. The most basic thing you can do is try not to hit somebody with your car while you're driving and don't take
Please.
another life. Like, you know, in terms of like community engagement, everyone should, you know, try to do things that they can with the time and resources that they have available, you know, assuming whatever. Like, do what you can, but this is this is just something you're already doing. You're already driving, you're already walking, you're already biking. Just try to do so more responsibly and think about the human rights of yourself and others that are influenced by your activities there.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a lot of what we're doing here, and you know, we should show at some point. Do we have the ability to queue up some of these human rights videos on that?
I'm not sure. Potentially. I know that the ones that we are referring to are the right to life, the right to responsibility, the right to play, and the freedom of movement.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent. I love these PSAs.
Yeah.
And if we can, whenever point we can show the right to
Yeah.
play, that is one of my favorite PSAs. So
Yeah.
whenever we can get that on, that'd be great.
But if we can't have that on the show directly, you can always go to youthforhumanrights.org, and we have all of the PSAs there, and they're really well produced and interesting, and they've been shown around the world, I believe, too. So yeah. And speaking of PSAs, Damien has, through SAFE, his own PSAs that he works with students to create in high school with a program called Streets Art Safe, which is close to me because I've helped write grants for it and write curriculum materials to help teach students how to make PSAs. But you can talk a little bit about that. I think he's going to have the videos for us.
Oh, good.
But you can talk about your own PSAs too.
Well, so this particular program, we have a number of programs, and
Of course.
one of our programs is working with high school students to make traffic safety public service announcements. PSAs, for those who don't know, is a public service announcement.
Right.
And
It's like the more you know.
Yeah, exactly. That's just a classic example. And basically any TV and radio station, and I think newspapers, also have to put in free public service announcements. I'm
Right.
not sure on newspapers, but at least TV and radio stations
Sure.
have to put in public service announcements for free. And that's part of the requirement for having a license to be able to air anything is you have to do a certain amount of free public service announcements.
Right.
So you'll see them out there. Okay, so we work with high school students, and high school students are at the point where they're starting to learn how to drive. So this program is got a dual purpose. It's actually got about 4 or 5 purposes. One of them is we work with them to make public service announcements. So it's arts education and leadership and group and research, working as a group and doing research and things like that. But it also educates them on traffic safety and gets them to make public service announcements that we can use to educate other high school students.
And who knows how better to speak to high school students than high school students? They know what they're dealing with, what resonates with them, what kind of issues they're coming with. I'm not that old, but I feel like when I talk to high school students now, I'm like kind of like out, not hip anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm beyond hip at this point. So we've got these public service announcements, and these high school students make them, and we have high schools all over Southern California, from down in Orange County over to Riverside, San Bernardino area. We don't have anyone yet in Ventura, but we have all across Los Angeles County making public service announcements. We work with the Los Angeles Police Department on this. They're actually a proud partner in this particular public service announcement, this film competition, and we have Hollywood filmmakers who are, we have a whole list of them that work with these students to help mentor them in making the public service announcements. And then we have a whole Oscar-style award ceremony usually in May, June time period, and we typically hold it at the American Film Institute. So for those of you who don't know what the American Film Institute is, in the film industry, this is one of the most prestigious film schools in the world, at least in the U.S., if not the world. And it was actually created by a presidential decree as part of an effort to archive and recognize the best films made in America. So the original intent of the American Film Institute is to archive and acknowledge the best in filmmaking across the United States, as ordered by the President of the United States back in the 40s it was.
Yeah.
And it also is a film school. So we actually hold the award ceremony at the American Film Institute.
Yeah.
And award the students with their prizes and trophies, and it's a great time there. And we have some incredible PSAs. And if you ever want to see some of them, you can go to the Streets Are For Everyone YouTube channel, or you can go onto the Streets Are For Everyone website. And there's the Streets Art Safe film competition there, and we have some of our past winners. Recommend, if you get a moment, check out Yearbook.
Yeah, I was going to recommend that one too.
Yearbook is unbelievable. Made by high school students.
Yeah.
It will completely change your viewpoint. I'm not even going to tell you what it's about because I don't want to. It's a 30-second PSA, but in 30 seconds, you will go from, wow, this is kind of nice, to, if not crying, at least completely shocked in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And it's so well done and made by high school students. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it required a lot of technical expertise to make. Mm-hmm. So it really demonstrates a lot of filmmaking skill too, which I'm sure is going to be important to the kids who made it in terms of their portfolios and where they go from here. So it's a great opportunity for them as
Yeah.
well as a community service.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of our programs. We actually have a number of programs. Can I tell you about Safe Support? Okay, good. This is a program. So Streets Are for Everyone works on advocacy and grassroots advocacy and education.
Right.
And really, you have to have those advocates. You have to have people who care about safer streets. And if you don't have people who care about safer streets, you don't have an organization.
Right.
Obviously, you know, there's the funding and things like that, but it's really the individuals, the volunteers, the people
Yeah.
who care about it. And with 42,000 people across the U.S. who are hit and killed every year, and in LA County, the number of people who end up in the hospital or dead is almost 42,000 people just in LA County. That's not 42,000 dead, but in the hospital or...
Yeah, dealing with
those
a
who-
serious injury.
That's right. With that number of people, there should be a lot of advocates out there. You
Yeah.
would think, right?
Yeah.
'Cause it impacts everyone. in
Yeah, like
some
I
way.
said, once you start thinking about it, you know, just mention this at like a party next time. Be like, oh, traffic safety. Has anyone ever been hit by a car? And probably there will be at least one person who has.
Not even probably. I mean, I've done a show of hands. Every single person either knows someone who's been severely injured or killed, or they themselves have been hit and have ended up in the hospital. It's rare to find someone who doesn't have a direct connection, or they themselves have not been impacted by the subject. So you would think there would be lots of advocates, there would be lots of people. There isn't.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found is that there's no actual group out there across the entire U.S. that's really reaching out to the people who end up in the hospital.
Right.
Or end up losing loved ones.
Yeah.
To work with them, to help them.
Yeah, especially right away. Like maybe you can get some support from a group 6 months later when you've figured out, or you now have a prosthetic limb and you want to go to some, have some sort of advocacy around that. But what do you do? Like, you get hit and you're severely injured and you don't know, do you get a lawyer? How do you talk to your doctors? Do you need a specialist? How does your health insurance work when it comes to this? Is it health insurance or is it legal? Like, do you talk to the city? Do you talk to a police officer? Who do you talk to? What do you do?
Yeah, and it's usually, so there's no group out there that does what's called the critical care for the person themselves.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about actual health care. I'm talking about the life situations and the mental health of people after they've been hit.
How do you manage your job? How do you manage your relationships with your loved ones now that you're severely injured? How does your family cope with the situation?
That's right. So that doesn't exist across the entire U.S. And that is what Safe Support is it's actually the nation for the U.S. By the way, it does actually exist in Europe.
Oh.
But in the U.S., we haven't been able to find any other organization like it. So it supports those who end up in the hospital after a traffic collision. And it's everything from, help on legal advice, healthcare advice. So the person who runs the program is actually a registered nurse, so she can actually tell you why you're taking certain medications and tell you if you need to get a second opinion and what the doctors are doing. And
right.
all of those points are covered by Safe Support. And as well as advocacy and helping a person once they've gotten back on their feet to become an advocate for safer streets. And that's how we build advocates for safe and for organizations that we work with, like Families for Safe Streets. That's how we work with the hospitals to get those individuals, help them to get back on their feet and make them into advocates. And it's a great program, and it's free. That's the best thing about it is 100% free for those individuals or the family members of those individuals who have been affected by traffic collisions.
Right. Yeah, and even just, it's great to have help with the medical and the legal and all these logistics, but even just having a person to talk to that understands what you're dealing with or has empathy for what you're dealing with is very valuable to people. Like, I knew someone who was in Europe and got hit by a tram, and just being able to talk to her and like relate to what she was going through and talk about traffic safety, I think she found incredibly helpful, and I was really glad that she did. But even just, you think that if this happens to so many people, it would be talked about more and you would have all these friends that you can talk to about it. But it's, it's a very traumatic thing and people don't talk about it that much, or they refer to it as an accident, which, just seems like a word. But if you've been, hit by a tram or something and someone's like, oh, it's too bad you had an accident. It's like, no, I did not have an accident. There's something wrong here. There's something preventable here. So just even having another person that is like there for you and trying to figure out how you can be in control over the situation and make a difference is a huge thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And so if anyone who's listening to this, if they're interested in getting help from Safe Support,
yes.
Again, go to the streetsareforeveryone.org website. So it's streetsareforeveryone.org. That's all spelled out. And go there, you will see a page on there called Safe Support. And it has all the information about the program, what it covers. It has a phone number and email address where one can reach out for help. And maybe, you've been a victim of a traffic collision and it happened a few months ago, but you are still dealing with consequences and you need some help. You need some medical advice. You need to know, hey, I'm having trouble with my lawyer, or I don't know what to do with my insurance, or just some peer support, just to talk to someone. It's all free. Call us up or email us, and we can definitely work with you on that. It helps us because hopefully, you'll become an advocate for safer streets. At least you'll get educated on safer streets, and you can talk to people and not use the A word and talk about crashes and collisions instead of accidents. So that's all very beneficial for us as well as for you.
Yeah, and then just while we're coming almost to a close here, but while we're talking about safe programs, people can also sign up with an affiliated program called Finish the Ride if they have been in an accident. Right?
Yeah, so Finish the Ride is one of our, see, I make the mistake too sometimes. So Finish the Ride is actually one of our big fundraisers. And that was started by myself, and it's a bike ride and a run. It is a fundraiser for Streets Are For Everyone. It's a great event. So if you're a cyclist, it's rides from everything from a 10-mile ride, roughly 10 miles for family, all the way up to a half-century ride, 50 miles, with 4,000 feet of elevation gain, all fully supported with rest stops and technical stations for cyclists and things like that, as well as runs. By the way, this all happens in Griffith Park, right near where I was hit, which is the reason why it's there, is as a reminder of what happened.
And the concept is finish the ride. Like, you're going to get back out there and finish the ride that you started.
And never
and
give
hopefully
up.
have a picnic at some point, too.
For the runners, it's called Finish the Run, and that's a 5K, 10K, or a half marathon on trails. It's a great event. It's happening. The next one is May 19th. So if you're listening to this, if you're a runner or a cyclist, absolutely check it out, finishtheride.org, or you can go to the streetsareforeveryone.org website. Either way, we're also on Facebook. So go ahead and check out our Facebook page, finishtheride.org, or Finish the Ride, or Streets Are For Everyone Facebook pages, Instagram, Twitter. We're all over social media.
You're on
but
it.
check out the websites, the streetsareforeveryone.org website, or the finishtheride.org website if you want to run or cycle in the next event.
Yeah, and that's a great way to exercise your right to play while you also exercise your right to responsibility, and you help out with right to life, freedom to move. This is a very human rights oriented, fun activity that you can do.
It's all about it there. I love how we speed up as we get closer to the end.
So we have 27 seconds left to talk about traffic safety. So my PSA is please don't jaywalk.
Yes. Oh, by the way, if you're not familiar with the term jaywalk, which I think, is that a U.S. term?
Oh, might be. Jaywalking is when you cross the street at a point when you do not have a clear crosswalk designated to you, and it is illegal to cross.
Yeah.
So you're crossing while cars are moving. They're not at a stop. They're not at a stop sign, a stoplight, anything, and you're just, running across there.
I think that's a good spot to end.
Yep. Great.
T-E-D. The world will be a better place, you know? As it pulls from my pen, pain pulls from my heart. Knowing this kid somewhere that actually starved. Take the time out, close your eyes, just picture this. No color, no hate, nemesis or differences. TV is filling me with scenes of negativity, but we can control it if we cooperate willingly. We came a long way, but got so much further to go. Guns kill, but hatred destroys us the most. And the problem could never be solved, you see. Human rights define the word equality. If we don't respect and love each other, we're just living a lie. Because united starts with you and I, you feel me?
U-N-I-T-E-D, a better place this world would be. We're all in this game, can't you see? We're all a part of this family tree. U-N-I-T-E-D, a better place this world would be. We're all in this game, can't you see? We're all a part of this family tree.
We all are born free and equal, free to walk and free to talk, free to dance, free to jump and free to prance. And what I'm saying, gotta keep it together, no matter how bad the weather. It will be alright, keep it tight, cause we all got our freedom rights every day, from the night to the broad daylight. Don't discriminate, learn to appreciate, so you don't have to imitate. Don't be the one to hate, it's never too late. You got the right to life, innocent to prove the guilty. You can say what you like, gotta get the education. Don't throw it away, know your human rights, cause it can help you someday.
U-N-I-T-E-D, a better place this world would be.